All right, welcome everybody. Just our quick spiel on OVW. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. And then I'll hand it to Karen. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you all so much, everyone. And y'all will get to know me a little bit in a minute, but I'm really excited to join your cohort today. Like Marcela said, I'm joining from or I was in cohort 8. And so it's exciting for me to explore with you all the program development and sustainability topic. I'm sure a lot of you are experts in this area, whether it's you're newer to your role or you're been very seasoned in your role or the organization, please share your insights as we go along because I definitely always find that I learn through other people's experiences, through especially if they have challenges that they've worked through. It just allows me to save that pain and time for myself. So definitely feel free to share. I'll be sharing throughout, from my own experience as a leader in this area of work. But we definitely want to have, and make sure that this is a conversation, and so, although there's a lot of great content that we want to share with you, we know that you all have great ideas too. So, I'm excited to connect with you all and also invite you all to share as we go through.
And then I will just go through this really quickly and mostly as a reminder that you can use the chat. I'll be supporting Karen with any questions or comments that are shared in the chat. We will be sharing the slides. Actually, the slides are already in the folder, but the recording will be shared either later today or tomorrow. I don't think anyone has joined by phone, but if you did, you can use to unmute yourself, you'll use *6. And then if you want to unmute yourself or make a comment or ask a question, then you can use the hand raising function. That way I can let Karen know that someone has something to share with us. And then we can move forward from there. And then a little bit about Karen. Karen has a lot of experience in the anti-trafficking field, came to us from cohort 8. And actually last year she was going to do a training on strategic planning and then wasn't able to make it. And so I'm really, really happy to bring her back to provide a training on program development and sustainability. Karen, I see you've started a consulting business called Cultura Training and Consulting. So definitely share a little bit more about that and your background.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for having me again, Marcela. That's really exciting to be able to come back to this work. And I hope that for everyone that's part of this cohort, that you all have really enjoyed LEAP the way that I did. I think I was definitely looking for a space to connect with peers, especially as a person of color who doesn't have those types of peers at my level. And so it was really exciting to be able to get that and to like get each other and be like, oh, me too. So that was really great. But like Maricena mentioned, so I have been on this journey for about, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years maybe, to reclaim my name in my own language. So I pronounce my name Karen Romero, and you'll hear me say it like that. I'm totally fine with people saying it in English. It's just definitely been my own like personal journey in getting back to my own roots and the way that my name was given by my parents. So you'll hear me pronounce it in that way. So with that being said, I've been in the anti-trafficking and domestic violence and sexual assault field and kind of those intersecting areas for over 12 years. So I started off as a therapist at a rape crisis center, and I was working as a bilingual therapist with survivors of sexual assault and sexual violence. And I went on to direct a domestic violence shelter, which that was, and as a baby in my career, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. There were a lot of mess ups there. There were a lot of learning opportunities. There were a lot of areas where I like definitely felt a gut check where I would know or feel that some of the approaches that we were taking like didn't feel true to me or to my values. But sometimes it was really difficult as a newbie or as a somebody who's newer into the field to question long-standing traditions, long-standing approaches, long-standing ways of doing things. And it wasn't until many years later that I was like, I knew they were wrong, and in being a part of that work, that I should have listened to that gut, and I should have said something. And so I've definitely like gotten better about healing that gut, and doing some and calling things in when I'm seeing them. But that being said, so I after that I've been doing work in direct services both in Utah and in DC. So I currently reside in Utah. So this the area of Salt Lake City, and that's the home of the Paiute and Goshute tribes. And so we have had the opportunity to try to see some of the work that has happened here. I lived in the DC area for about 6 years, and then had a little family, or I still have them. But we're like, we need family. So, we moved back over to Utah where my family lives, and we're able to have more community here with my kids and with my partner and my husband. So that, in the work that I've been doing for the last about 8 years, I've been working on training and technical assistance nationally, more specifically around human trafficking. So we support organizations that are either new or, trying to troubleshoot on some of the approaches on service provision on human trafficking. And obviously there's a lot of intersections there with domestic violence, with sexual assault, and with other forms of violence. But like Marcela said, I did, LEAP really inspired me to launch my own consulting. So I've been doing that on the side where I get to just enjoy some of the areas that I've been able to develop professionally and personally, and be able to consult with other organizations around the topics of human trafficking or domestic violence or sexual assault, how to implement, approaches that are trauma informed, that are voluntary, that support people that come from very diverse backgrounds, and also been supporting some organizations in their program development. So this is why it's really exciting for me, because I've definitely jumped into programs, not jumped, but I've come into programs as a new hire for programs that have already existed, and I'm kind of just following what they've been doing. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes there's like questions to be asked, and I've definitely been part of standing up new programs and projects and figuring out how those pieces work. So all to say, I'm really happy to share from my experience, because one thing that I noticed in my own career path is that nobody ever like sat me down and said like, hey, this is how budgets work, or here's how program development work, or here's how supervision work. Nobody ever did that. And there's so many times where I like legit would break down and cry, because I was like, these numbers don't add up. They don't add up. They don't make sense. And I questioned myself so much, because I was like, I'm just not the right person for this job. Or like, there's clearly something missing. I'm not smart enough, which I'm like, I am smart enough. So I hope that those pieces resonate with you all, that you all are definitely the people for this job. You all are meant to be here. And if you're struggling with something, it makes sense, because it's likely nobody has given or provided you that support that you should have had earlier on to really, allow you to be nourished and understand and like set us up for success. So I'm going to share a lot of like the failures that led me to success, because I do find that it's better to save people the time and the tears, because I'm definitely like, when I get frustrated, I'm like, ah. So if I can save you that through some of my experiences, I'd love to do that. So let's jump into it. One the learning objectives, so things that I want you and we want you to really hopefully walk away with today, is to talk about the basic elements of program design. So those are we're gonna be talking about what kind of questions, what kind of issues and challenges are gonna come up in developing and modifying some mission-driven programs. And we're going to talk about also how to address sustainability. So that's sustainability both financially, like that's money, but that's also sustainability for the program and the people, right? So we're going to be touching on all of those. What I would love to hear from you all, though, is how this topic of development and sustainability, how does it tie in to previous topics that you've already been a part of, whether you're LEAP cohort. So if you can either raise your hand or type in on the chat how this connects to previous learning. So that way we can kind of have that thread going where this builds up that foundation that you all have been working on. So if anybody wants to share, that would be great.
Hi, Karen. My name is Griselda, and I think it all connects together. When we talk about program development, I see the focus on social justice. What are the core issues? What are we working towards to combat or fight or change? How are we going to do this as an organization? How are we going to organize ourselves? How are we going to convey this to the community in a way that, you know, it is not intimidating or scary, that we can get our message across? And then how are we going to eventually sustain this and potentially grow as a program? So that's how I see it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. You said that. And that's right on. It's tying all of these pieces together because they're all connected to each other. Once you pull on one, the other one gets pulled too, right? And if one feels a little weak, then the other pieces and areas feel a little weak too. Absolutely. Deborah, I'm seeing in the chat that it helps guide our mission and vision for the programs, including the staff, 100%. What else? Oh, there's a good one, but it's long. So let me just make sure I can call it out from the chat. So one of the jobs of core values of sustainable passion, and Resi is sharing that our website says we dedicate ourselves to operating sustainable and efficient programs by collaborating with partner organizations, being fiscally sound, and building and maintaining community support. Yes, 100%. That's right on. And a lot of, this work that we do around program development and sustainability, it does require connections and collaborations with partner organizations, with community. And then also there is that fiscal, that money attachment and awareness that we need to have. So sometimes, I think for some people, and especially me early in my career, budgets really worried me and scared me and I didn't understand them, or like it was just overwhelming, how to make sure that we could sustain something, how we can have the funding to keep it going. Because sometimes the ideas just get so exciting and we want to stand something up, but it's also how do you not just stand it up for a short time frame and then it goes away, but how do we make sure that it continues to be a resource for the populations that you're trying to serve? So that's right on. Any other thoughts before we move on to talking a little bit more about a chat question? Yeah,
I
go
guess
ahead.
I'm
Here, I'm
sorry.
gonna
I
go
don't know
back.
if you can
No,
hear me.
no, please
I
don't.
guess I would say that sustainability ties into previous LEAP topics, are probably looking at when we have talked about amplifying our impact or strategic branding. And I think you have to have a level of sustainability to do any of those things. And you got to develop your program if you want it to amplify, if you need it to grow, or if you want to look at, how we can brand or rebrand to stay relevant and to address the ever-changing needs that are happening in our community. And so I am excited about this because I think it will tie into many of those areas.
100%. Thank you, Dawn. And that's exactly right. All of these pieces fit together in order to really support your organization, the people that you are serving, the staff that work within those organizations, and really the overarching community. These all need to be part of our program planning, and really like be very present and not a one-off. I think sometimes when we're thinking about program development, sustainability, sometimes it's like, once a year, but these are good things to be to have top of mind, right? As we keep going. Okay, any others before I move forward? And this is definitely the space and the time to chime in. So we don't need to go faster if people want to share. So just know that there's plenty of time and space. Okay, perfect. I'm not seeing anyone, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And feel free to just come off mute if you do want to share, just in case I don't catch like a little hand raised or anything. So I would love to hear from you in the chat in which ways you would like this workshop to enhance your capabilities in your role. So really think about, regarding today's topic on sustainability, on program development, what information would you like to walk away with that will serve you and support you in your role today, this week, this month, this year? What's something that you really were hoping to gain from this, whether it's a tangible piece of knowledge or like how do we think about this? How do we troubleshoot? I would like to troubleshoot a scenario. Go ahead and put in the chat what would be helpful from today's workshop that will really enhance the capability and the impact of your role. So I'll give you a couple of moments to put that in. Okay, perfect. I'm starting to see some responses coming in. So Carla is saying being able to sustain programs and staff given the financial challenges impacting rape crisis centers. Yes, absolutely. And I know there's definitely been budget cuts and some cuts to funding sources. So we'll definitely talk about some potential ways that you might want to start looking at sustainability planning for those challenges because unfortunately without financial resources that our programs can easily suffer. So thank you for sharing that, Carla. What else? What are you all hoping to get, or what will help? What type of information will enhance you in your role? Coming out of today's session. And granted, it's a 2-hour session, so it may not completely change you, but I would want to be mindful of whatever we can provide that we're able to do that for you. Also, as a note, I have a standing desk, and there's times where I think I'm going to stand longer than I can. So you'll see me going up and down once in a while. Nilda, yes, come on in.
Hi, so I think I'm on the other end. Our organization just purchased a campus, so now we're going to have a headquarters for all of our services and for our youth. So I'm thinking about creating new programming that enhances the work that we do because we have a lot more opportunity. So what does it look like to build additional programs from the bottom up that will be sustainable?
Yeah,
Basically utilizing the stake and making the most of this huge opportunity that we have, because moving to this new location, having a campus, the possibilities are endless, and that is a little bit overwhelming. And in the position that I am, there is going to be people looking to me to come forward with sustainable programming, and it's a little bit overwhelming. So just like kind of I want to leave from this, like, what are the starting points? Because I have so many ideas, but really just thinking about the sustainability piece of occupying this space.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Nilda. And it's nice to hear that that other point of the spectrum where it's like we luckily have and are fortunate to have these resources, and there's so much opportunity that it is important to also, with the excitement, it's also important to connect it and tie it back to these foundational parts and pieces of your mission, your vision, and how do we ensure that we have a strong foundation that will lead you to sustainability? Because there are definitely programs that like get very excited and forgot those foundational pieces and end up suffering along the way. So that's exactly right. Yeah, and we'll definitely be talking about that. So thank you for sharing that. Also referencing in the chat, I know you said that talked about learning about what sustainability and how it will help program grow, especially because most funding goes to direct services. So as grants come to an end, thinking about that's definitely front of mind for, I think, we said that, but definitely for a lot of people. Also sharing that being able to develop more programs in everything in housing and those fighting interpersonal violence, that's very helpful. And learning approaches to thinking about sustainability and planning. So that's very helpful. And luckily, all of these pieces will be touched on throughout the length of our time today. So if anything comes up, or you're really hoping to troubleshoot something, or we will have the space for that, and there that was luckily baked in, so we can have that time, so you can get some feedback. And then Evelyn's sharing that it's going to be helpful to learn how to implement systems that prevent potential challenges from arising. And that's right on. Challenges, they come up even for the most well-planned organizations or well-planned programs, but also there's very preventable challenges. And that's where we want to avoid, right? There's things that we can implement early on and make that foundation so solid that it's going to ease up the type of challenges and the number that are going to come up later on. So thank you for sharing. I'm just going to give one more moment in case anybody has any last pieces that they'd like to share as far as what they want to walk away with that was going to support them in their role.
I have a thing, May. I was thinking we're always thinking about financial sustainability, and I think right now what you're struggling is that is a big component. Work with folk communities but for our own too is like what kind of organizational leadership capacity, because we don't, as a leader, you want to be able to pass the baton or have a bunch of us do it so you don't burn out. And then when you're thinking about like the environment by which, because we hustle so much, but we're not that we just don't think about creating that other types of sustainability. So the organizational, environmental sustainability, the school of thought, so because if I just leave, or something happens, because something happens, then what about the program, the intent, the history, being able to pivot but pivot without losing the message and mission and all of that, I think is what is feeling that struggle.
Yeah.
Well.
And thank you for bringing that, because sometimes we get so on the administrative side where it's, finances and it is like the logistics and programmatic pieces that we forget that sustainability does also include investment into staff, into the people that are carrying out the work, right? And I know that that's covered in other sessions as well. But one of the things that does come to mind, and I'll make sure that we highlight this in the future, is what I've seen in some programs is that you'll have promotions, or especially for people that might be doing the direct services work, a case manager, an advocate, and they're expected to perform at a manager's role or, in a more administrative level. And I've seen it many, many times, unfortunately, where there's a gap and there's a frustration. And we're thinking, well, they were doing such a great job. That's why they were, that's why they were promoted. And now it's a struggle. And what, my learning has been, and even in my current role, it has been that unfortunately the organization did not set them up in a way to learn these things that they were supposed to. They weren't have as a case manager or advocates, but they're expected to perform, right? And it's having the awareness and the ability to say, okay, let's train you up to be able to deliver on these areas of your job. But also, Danielle, I definitely heard the grinding. Like, how many of us have been grinding since? I mean, honestly, since day one, right? We've been grinding, and it's like going. And there was definitely a part of my career, and I'm like trying to work that in my own head and in my own heart and being of like, does grinding is not going to be sustainable for me. And I've been grinding for 20 years. I'm tired. My body's feeling it. My head's feeling it. But how do we also not set people up who are coming into this work to feel the same, to be set up in that same track of feeling like, oh, I need to grind to show that I care. I need to grind to show that I'm a good worker. Because that was what I thought. I was like, in order to show that I'm a good worker, I need to grind. In order to get to where I want to be, I need to grind. Unfortunately, that is a little bit of what happened, right? I needed to in order to get to where I am. So very much heard. And I do have some ideas and thoughts that we've been implementing and we've been getting like pretty good results on. And then LaQuisha, I'm also wanting to call out that having programs that alter every day the lives for the better, but internally and externally. So do you mind adding a little bit more context to that, just so I make sure I capture, what you're conveying, if you're thinking about the internally and externally for the survivors, or if you're also trying to bring that into the staff that are delivering the services?
So I would say to both internally to those that are
You just went off on mute. Just had some.
sorry.
No.
Internally to the staff, but also internally for survivors and those who are being impacted by the work, that we're not just doing work just to do work, that it's really work that connects to their everyday lives, to impact their everyday lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's right on, is that connection that this does impact people like this. The work that you all are doing literally does have a significant impact on people's lives today, which can be like a heavy weight to carry, because sometimes it feels like I'm responsible for the outcomes or how people are able to, do on their day to day. And also, it's not, we're not the holders of everything. So just to line up that way. So thank you. Thank you all for chiming in and sharing, because I think that very much connects to what we want to share with you all today. So let's get into it. Let's talk about program development. So that's where we're going to start off, and then towards the latter half of this session, we'll talk about the sustainability, the financial piece of it. So a lot of times when we're talking about program development, a lot of us might be thinking new programs, right? New programs, we just got new funding, we just identified an area of work that was missing or a gap, so we're going to invest in it, even if like the funding or new funding may not be there. So we're going to try and work this through, right? But also it might be that you're already working and that there might not be any new funding, but you're working on an existing project and there's a challenge, right? So we really need to go back to this initial concepts of program development to see like, hey, where are the kinks? What can we work out here? So I'd love to hear about any new projects that people are launching. Nilda, you just mentioned one, so that, you want to chime in on that. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're looking to do. Also, if there's anybody that maybe it's not a new project, but might be more of a recent success or a challenge, right? Sometimes I find more help when I'm like, let me talk this out with someone that I don't work with. So that way I'm not like being judged, like, let me just talk this out messy and get some feedback. That's also, this is a great space for that. So go ahead and chime on in. You're welcome to use the chat. You're welcome to, just unmute, do a little hand if that feels more comfortable to you. But let's start with this discussion about what are you currently working on? Is there a new project or initiative that you're going to be launching? What kind of collaboration are you seeking? Or if there's, something that is a recent success of yours or of the projects, or a challenge that you're working through and that you want to share with us, that would be great. Okay, so I think we maybe got some on the chat. So I'm seeing we just got funding for a survivor advocacy board. That's great. And we've been looking to create this for the last year. That's a huge win, and that's fantastic. So congrats on that. So if we can call you, and just to make sure I'm saying your name correctly, is it Nel Silvia?
Yes.
I also sometimes notice that my head starts pronouncing names in Spanish even when they're not.
No,
So if that's not it,
the
please.
emphasis on it. Only like my dad and a few family members actually put the proper Spanish emphasis. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so tell us about this. Like, where are you at in your process? Are there any challenges that you're seeing so far? What's going on with it?
Yeah, so for us, the challenge to begin with was even getting the seed funding. This is something that our previous ED and I had came up with. And I've recently kind of shifted into the ED role. So this was something we've been talking about for the last year, but we're really struggling to get really the seed funding for it. And we finally just got a grant that, they said was general operating, but our project proposal was this advocacy board. So, we're gonna kind of do like a year zero of really just fully outlining what we want the board to look like, how we want to recruit. The real reason we wanted funding is because we want to be able to pay our survivors for their time served. Because if we're using their expertise and their lived experiences, they should also be getting paid for it. So that's why we didn't want to launch it until we knew we at least had some of this seed funding for it.
I love that. Yeah, I'm really excited for this, because I've definitely, I hope everyone else has too, seen a lot of investment, whether it's like money investment, but also like verbal investment in making sure that survivors are co-creators, co-developers. Like we're very much, it's like nothing, for us without us sort of vibe, which is exactly right, right? They should be real partners, and real partners should be paid. And so that's exactly right. So it sounds like this is, new. It's your first year kind of getting this together. And then is there kind of a hope of where you see this going, where you would like to see it, in 2 to 3 years, even 5 from now?
Yeah, so I think our hope is that by next year we can start recruiting actual members for it. And each kind of cohort would be at least like a 2-year term on this board, because we want to make sure we're providing them training on leadership and advocacy and public speaking. Because really what we're trying to have this board be is essentially a platform for Black women survivors in DC that we work with, to have a voice in a lot of the initiatives that are happening around DC, in some of the funding issues that we're running into, and what trainings that should be in the courts and with the police officers, because again, this is their lived experience. We can only do so much from our vantage point as service providers, when really they're the ones that have to deal with these issues on a frequent day-to-day basis. So giving them the avenues and the platform to really speak up about it.
Yeah. And that's really great. And I think that's right on. It's connecting to the community, what you're already identifying the need, right? For them to be able to have the advocacy in their own voice for the efforts that you all are doing, and making sure that it's very much community driven, and that they're supported by being compensated for their labor, which is extremely important. And then just so because it came to mind, there is this organization. It's youth focused, but it's called Youth Collaboratory. They have what's called a Girls Action Board. Okay, Danielle, you're like nodding yes. So I've been able to connect with them, and they like really invest in their advisory board members who are youth with lived experience. Specifically, for that one, it's primarily Black girls, and it has been just the work that they've put into, and the thought into like their partnership, into really making like that power differential, less, has been really great. So anyways, if you're not familiar, or if you would like to be connected, definitely let me know. I can share some contact information afterwards, because it has been amazing to see how they have really utilized that board in so many ways to like really develop the individuals that they're working with.
I absolutely will. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think once that you just put in the chat, that organization. So if other people are interested, that is a really great way to connect. So thank you for sharing. Other projects that people are working on, and this can be something that you're really excited about. It could be something you're excited about, but there's a challenge or some kinks that are happening along the way. Ashley, yeah, come on in.
So it's super new, so I don't have a lot of information on it, but I know that my organization is about to start trying to create a program that focuses on restorative justice. And we've been talking about how I can be involved in it. So I have started going down the rabbit hole of trying to know everything, the new updates to restorative justice, because there's a lot of information that is outdated now and things like that. So trying to make sure that we have a good foundation of where we want to start is really important. So that's just a project that we are about to start working on. It's going down the restorative justice lane.
I love that. And actually, is this the restorative justice? Is that an approach that your organization is already like bought into? Is that part of the foundation, or is this a little bit newer for some of them?
Kind of, sort of, but it's not really something we're really talking about at all. I think a lot of the people who work here talk a lot about it personally, but as far as what we're actually doing, we're not really involved in it.
Got it. No, and that's great. And the reason why I bring it up is in my own organization, we've had a lot of conversation. A lot of it, I think it comes from personal interest and commitment to that approach, and where we've come up with some challenges. So there's just kind of like a, hey, just, heads up, is where we haven't had that as a values or a framework of the organization. It tends to bump up sometimes because we end up creating an approach or a system for policies and procedures, even where it's like, oh, that's kind of contradictory, And then there's frustration, especially on the staff side, who's trying to carry out the work because like that doesn't match up, it's, and then there's conflict,
Absolutely. And then whenever we've tried to have conversations about different topics that fall under that category, it's gotten pretty heated amongst people. So I know it's gonna be a challenge of, people putting their personal feelings to the side and really focusing on how we can help our community.
100%. Yeah. And that sounds really, really wonderful. That there is that interest in buy-in, and especially as you're thinking about this is a new program, you're going to develop it out. It does, and as we're going to dive into it, there is a need for it to connect to the mission, the vision, the values of the organization. And this might be a great time to start that conversation. Is this focus of this project is on restorative justice. We want to make sure that it connects, that is exemplified by the organization. And sometimes it's, I think in my experience, it has been just a lack of knowledge or like a lack of, or maybe like the presence of fear of like, we don't know what we don't know. So we're a little worried to get into these conversations. Ashley, are you in a culturally specific organization? Sorry, no, I think you're muted. I think okay. When Ashley comes back, no worries, no worries. The reason why I also bring this up is for those of you that are in culturally specific and responsive organizations, sometimes these conversations, not to say that they're just shared or encompassed within the organization, but they tend to have sometimes a little bit more challenges when they're with mainstream organizations, and there is that diversity of background and experiences and approaches. And sometimes just a lot of these frameworks are very new to some of our colleagues. And there's a little bit of a frustration of catching people up and ready, like some people are ready to go, let's get going. And it's like, wait, our colleagues aren't there yet. And so just to highlight that, because I know I've definitely experienced that as well. While Ashley is able to reconnect. So Deborah's sharing that they recently got funding on a housing navigator to work with our Family Safe Center. I'm not sure of any challenges yet, but we have been roundtabling to get focused. That sounds really exciting. And Deborah, is this a new position as far as, obviously housing is a significant issue, but role of housing navigator is a little bit newer, at least in my experience. Oftentimes the housing, finding and those connection pieces just falls on the case manager, and it's like, they need to do it all, right? You need to go find the housing, you need to do the case management, you need to do it all. So tell us more about that.
It's a little different because we have a housing navigator now. So it's completely separate from our transitional housing advocate or our rapid rehousing advocate. So that person is supposed to get in contact with all the landlords, all of the people who are in the community, the homeless coalition, to make sure we have a continuum of care working with them to get apartments and everything. So this is different because we're specifically working with the Family Safety Center. So all of those clients that are usually going through coordinated entry to get into us, we now have a specific person designated for that. So it may be a little tricky because it may be overwhelming because right now it's over 400 people monthly on the list. So adding Family Safety Center to that, it could be a little overwhelming, but we're still working out the fine lines of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really exciting. Was that a position that was identified as part of, just your need of your organization? Was it part, and we're seeing this more on solicitations from some of our federal funders that they're starting to, especially with housing, put them into the grant. So how did that come about? How did that decision happen?
Basically through the continuum care. We all talked with a lot of the shelters, a lot of the people in the community, and it's just been, we all know housing is awful, but if you're fleeing domestic violence, IPV, it's even worse. So it was, how do we get more people out there to talk to the landlords? How do we get them invested to help work with these individuals who may have arrears and things like that because of leaving and their lease didn't expire yet, but they've got all this rent that hasn't been paid off. So we just said, let's do it. And it came about with the mayor's office and we have it, so.
That is awesome. Well, congratulations. That is a huge win, and hopefully it does also, with a lot of excitement around it. Also, the expectations can be like up here of like, as soon as this person is in place, we are going to have housing for everyone, right?
Oh
and it's
God,
like,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So have you been feeling kind of that sense of expectations from some of your staff?
Definitely, definitely, because everyone's thinking, so once this person is in place, is it just the expectation that you got 50 people right here who need housing? It's like, wait, we still need to do case management. We still need to make sure that they've got all these things in place, therapy, all the voluntary services.
Yep.
And I think, do we have that all kind of marked out yet? So it's a little nerve-wracking now because it's like, okay, so now we're on a pedestal. What next? So it's a little
Yeah.
unnerving, yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I think when we come from a place or a program or experience of scarcity where we haven't had it before, and there's a lot of excitement, and a lot of times we blame, not we blame it, but we attribute it to like, well, we can't get these people a house because we don't have the time to go and make the relationships with the landlords. We don't have the time to navigate this whole continuum of care, public housing authority system, like all
Yeah.
these systems that are. And so once this person is in, clearly that would be fixed, right? In our heads, in people's heads.
Yeah.
Are you going to be the one primarily working with this new position?
The executive director and I both will be
Okay.
hands-on until we get them trained and working really, I mean, the Family Safety Center is our biggest partner. So we're going to be working hands in hand to just to get this moving. And if we can do this, it's the money's every year. We may have to ask for another position, but it's going to be a big accomplishment because we already have one working with our facility.
Yeah.
So we know what it takes, but there's still some unknowns.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, so that this is very exciting. I think, as we dive into more of this discussion around program development, like a new position is
Mhm.
going to open up, not only new doors, but you're going to see some kinks that will, we're present before. There's just someone that's going to be able to highlight them and flag them a little bit more clearly because they're the ones that are going to be experiencing it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Well, thank you for sharing. That is such a huge win, and I'm really excited to hear how it
Yeah.
goes. So, okay, any others that would like to
So
share? Yeah.
I'll go. We currently have a program that is under the Advocacy League, which is our Survivor Advocate program, where we do a 6-week training with survivors, teaching them how to be, in a sense, a public survivor and an advocate and what that looks like, training them for the good, bad, the ugly of being public with their stories. And then the second half of the program is where we help them to advocate in specific ways for specific things utilizing their stories. So if there is a SAM event or if there's a education program and a component with a survivor speaker might be interested, we would provide them with the tools to speak at that particular thing. We prep them before and after. We are now in our third year of it. Internally, and we're in the process of making it external. The only issues that we're having right now is marketing and trying to find funding, as this is like the main project for the advocacy league of the department. This is fairly new of us having a full out advocacy league. I'm the senior manager of advocacy. And then we are also going through leadership changes again. So we had an interim executive director. Now we're about to have an executive consultant.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Uh-huh.
and we're still in search for executive director. So I think the biggest issue is with the program. It's like, well, will it change under new leadership? Will they feel the same value in this particular program? Will we be able to expand it as we thought that we would, as we plan to expand it? And we're trying to expand it outward to make it not just our internal clients, but external clients, and then also to do satellites within universities so that they have their own survivor advocacy program on their campuses.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I wonder, like, have you felt, is it Lakeisha?
Mhm.
Just to make sure. Okay. Have you felt in this time of transition, right, as leadership transitions, do you feel like that fear is or concern is shared with people around like how programs might shift, how approaches might shift depending on who is at the leadership level?
Yes, very much so, especially the special project ones, everyday education, prevention education programs and things like that nature seem more secure than the special citywide initiative programs that we have
Oh,
going. And that this program is one of the citywide initiatives.
got it. Got it. And I'm curious, do you feel like that is due to just the preference of whoever's there? Or is it just like
In a
what do you
sense,
what's your sense?
yes, but also because there isn't there hasn't been a build up for this particular leg of the agency within of itself. This is all fairly new. So the idea, like my role is not even a role that existed prior to me having the role.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just like the vision of leadership. So now it's like, okay, well, how do we secure this, especially given that there is no direct funding line attached to advocacy in this way? I'm still kind of under education because I do our Safe Bars program, which is another citywide initiative. So I'm kind of I have a dual role in a sense, but it's been on the tail end of how leadership views and whether or not it's going to be able to be built out and we can build an advocacy department or not. So I'm in the process. This program is the one program that's helping to build the actual leg of advocacy within the organization. And I think that's the bigger issue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the tools that we're going to be going over talks about how investment and how not is like it intersects with sustainability, but also how we invest on things that may not be making money or even have a funding stream right now to support it, but they make the most impact. And they're going to set you up for that. And that is a way of also conveying to leadership, especially for some of us who may not be at that, executive level role where we might need to have buy-in from that leadership to say, hey, this is worth and very much requires this investment. And this is a tool that you all can use, to demonstrate that. But also to connect it back to, this is why it's important to us as an organization and to the community that we, are saying that we're serving. So I thank you for sharing that. That's actually very helpful. And hopefully the tool that it's a matrix that we'll share. Hopefully it supports some of that, even sharing with your own leadership as that, but good luck. I know transitions are challenging. They're hard.
Yeah, this one was unexpected too. So
yeah, and that makes it that even makes it the most even more difficult. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Or then anything that people want to share? No? Okay. And then let's go ahead and move forward. And then actually just acknowledging the culturally specific question. This is on the chat. I had asked Ashley earlier on as they look to implement a new approach, if it was culturally specific or even a culturally responsive organization. Like I was mentioning, sometimes in my experience, when I'm currently working in a mainstream organization, and coming to these conversations with very, very different backgrounds and approaches, it has been hard. It has been hard. It has been a lot of like ouch moments, a lot of tender spots that have been hit for a lot of people of color. And so it just has I have benefited, and I think a lot of our people of color have benefited from having a expert in that topic area to support and navigate, honestly teach some of our colleagues some of the concepts, so that way we don't take that on as the brown person who I'm going to teach you about this, right? Because that's also like, although I think I'm versed in it, I don't know that that's an area of my expertise. So I'll just say, just sharing, Ashley, in case that's useful, it has been very beneficial for us to invest in somebody that can support the full group in learning. So let's go ahead and, really talk about when you're starting a new program, where do these programs, come from? Some of your organizations, they may have been around for a long, long time, right? You maybe have been there for a long time. We've had people in the past who have been founders of the organization. For some people, it's like, this is a new role to me, even though I've been to the organization for a bit. It might be a newer organization, or you're joining a program that existed way before you came on. And so as programs are developed, really we need to start thinking about how the program or the project itself is tied to the mission and the way that you carry out, right, that mission. So in thinking about your values, your mission, these serve as the foundation of the identity of the organization, the purpose of the organization. And the programs end up being like this tangible way that you as the staff, the people in the community, the survivors receiving services, that they see that mission in action, right? So for the people that are providing the housing, you're seeing that gap. You want to provide safety and long-term sustainability, hopefully, around housing for survivors of domestic violence. For those that are working with potentially standing up that this new advisory board is really empowering survivors to be developers, everything, co-partners in this movement. That is their movement, and that they're being compensated fairly, right? And we also heard about, advocacy programs are like really supporting survivors to be able to have the tools, the framework, the support to share their stories in a way that feels empowering to them, and that they have the support to of a program, of a project that is there to really support them. So when we're understanding the community needs, that's probably the most important. I have worked in, like I mentioned, in these different areas, but definitely I've developed, I think, or I've just worked in housing for a while and doing training and technical assistance for a while. So one of the things that I would hear often is like, we're going to stand up a housing program, and this is nationwide, right? We're going to stand up a shelter for survivors of human trafficking. And it was like, okay, like, tell us more. What are you hoping to accomplish? Who are you looking to serve? Have you done a community needs assessment? As far as like, is this a need for the community that you're looking to go into? Or is it something that you just got really excited about? So what I realized and noticed is that for some of the programs that we were working with in technical assistance and training, some of them were newer to human trafficking, some of them were newer to housing, but this was happening, I would say, over the last like 5 or so years. The area of human trafficking, they've just gotten more money. And so I think some people were like, hey, I'm seeing some money here. It's going to be able to, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but we were just seeing a lot of programs pop up, right? Not necessarily with the expertise, but I think with the desire. And so what we were seeing is that there were programs popping up, but the assessments were not really there. And what we have learned from a lot of these community programs and working with a lot of survivors with lived experience is that they're sharing, I don't want to be in a shelter, especially for adults. Like that I want privacy, I want autonomy. And a lot of times these these residential facilities, they limit a lot of that. And so where a lot of the movement work around housing, and this might be actually very similar to domestic violence as well, where it has been moving is to independent housing, to rental assistance, to connecting them with long-term solutions. But people are still, because it sounds exciting and we've heard some people that, in programs that are being stood up because of information that is not necessarily accurate, but it's like, we need to have a safe house. And so in doing some of our training and technical assistance, it was helping them, these programs and these individuals understand, what their community needs were. Are there other programs that are already meeting those needs? Are there already shelters in place? Are there already community programs that may be filling that gap? So the question that we really want to highlight here is, what gap does the program that you're looking to stand up, what gap does it fill within the community it serves? So the other thing that you want to think about is also the population, right? I've definitely been in places, even myself, where I'm like, I want to be everything to everyone. I want to help everyone with everything that I can. That A, is not realistic. B, it's not, I'm not the expert in everything. And so I'm just trying to take too much on. And I've definitely seen organizations where it's like, we do everything for everyone. And not only do they not do that, but sometimes they don't do it well because we're trying to cover so many things, right? So one of the things that I had, we stood up, this was in DC, I don't know, like 8 years ago. I worked at a immigrant specific serving organization. And there, during that time, there was a lot of unaccompanied minors that were coming into the DMV area. So DMV, by the way, if you're not from the DMV, when I moved to DC, I thought they were talking about the DMV, like where you get your driver's license. It confused me for a long time. It's DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So DMV. So when I was in the DMV area, what we're seeing is that there were a lot of unaccompanied minors, and our organization, being an immigrant specific organization, we were getting a ton of referrals. And I worked with the unaccompanied minors, survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. So what we're seeing is that a lot of these unaccompanied minors were coming in, they were reuniting with family in the US. And we were seeing a lot of challenges with the families that had been apart for a while. And there was just a disconnect between the children and the parents. And it was hard on both ends. There were a lot of big feelings. There was a lot of, trying to be a parent after they had been away for so long, the child like having resentment. And these are, you know, not to generalize, but those were a lot of the big issues that we're seeing. A lot of the kids were now adolescents when they had been probably, the parents had migrated when they were a little bit younger. So they're going through their own adolescent, you know, growth and challenges, as well as just having difficulty reuniting with family and coming into a new country, coming into a new culture, right? So we're seeing a lot of this happening. Meanwhile, we're trying to do case management around like human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, immigration. And it's like there's still this disconnect. There's still this disconnect that we're trying to do, you know, like, how are we going to get you into school? Let's make sure we, you know, we go through these processes of how, you know, how to make sure you have safe housing, et cetera. But there was still an issue and a challenge for these families of just reuniting with each other. So what we ended up doing is that there was this local organization that provided us funding to implement this program called Strengthening Families. And what it was based around was basically having dinner. And we did it once a week. We would provide the dinner, you know, we would cater it, or, you know, contract somebody to like come and cater a lot of it, because immigrant, you know, we were doing culturally specific meals or things that were like getting caterers that were from these culturally diverse companies. And so, and then we would have a skill that the parents would like do their workshop, and we would work on a skill. The youth and the young, you know, the young kids would have a different workshop. We'd come together, we'd practice it, they'd talk about it over dinner. And we just saw, I mean, it took a little bit, and by a little bit, it's like it took a while. But it's like the more we did it, the people got excited, you know, participants were like, that is awesome, especially because a lot of, I mean, all of them were really, you know, they were working. It was like we're taking at least the dinner piece off their, you know, their hands. They were just like here coming and getting some food. They were learning a skill, but like it was not so skill based. It was like just relational, right? And that was stood up because we're seeing a need that we didn't even realize we needed to approach, but it was such a significant gap in us even being able to do successful case management, because we were trying to focus on these very logistical things like, let's make sure you have housing, and then you have education, and you have these pieces. What are your goals? And meanwhile, there's this huge disconnect in these families that were reuniting. And that on top of that had all of them really, the ones that I was working with, had experienced some form of violence, whether it was domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. So it was just compounded trauma that was just preventing a lot of, you know, this work moving forward. So when we're talking about community needs, is, you know, identifying what gap does this program meet. And for us, it was like, it's meeting this gap of a space where parents and children are able to have a family dynamic that is, you know, that is a little bit massaged. And we're going to do this through food, because I don't know about you all, but I was like, food is the convener, right? That's how I feel. And also you'll see here in the bullet point at the bottom is decisions should be based on inclusive input from the community that you're seeking to serve, right? And so for these programs, before we even stood this up, I mean, I was like, I'm the one that's going to go look for this funding. Let's make sure that people actually need or want this or are going to come. Because I'm like, if we get this and nobody shows up, that's going to be embarrassing for me, but also like, let's not do that. So we did ask, you know, the participants that were coming in, hey, we're thinking about standing up this new program. It'd be once a week. It'd be at night. What day do you think? Would you want to do this? What would be helpful, etc. And that was really helpful in moving forward that program. Okay, we are a little bit close to the middle, and by the middle is we're at our halfway point. So I would love to go through these alignment of our program design with organizational mission, and then we will break if that works for people, and we'll do a 5-minute break. So just know that that's coming. So as you're thinking about how we align this program design with your mission of the organization, and this is where Lakeisha, we're talking about like the program that you all are, you know, have been standing up. It was a newer program, but you know, because of the transitions, it could be easy for someone new to come in and be like, well, how does that fit, right? If it is designed with this organizational mission, it allows you to maintain consistency, right? So these activities or interventions consistently reflect the organizational's core values, the principles, their goals, and it allows for them to have credibility among stakeholders. And really the credibility, and I think one of the most important stakeholders is going to be those that you serve, your community, right? And that's one way to be able to connect that and like strengthen need for the programs that you are doing, whether it's something that it's newer to your organization or something that you're looking to stand up. You want to maximize your impact. So thinking about how these programs can address these root causes of social issues and really genuinely meet the needs of the community. We want these to have positive outcomes. Thinking about also resource allocation, right? So where you have resources and how those support the initiatives that allow your organization to really carry out its mission, there's less of a risk of wasting, any resource or feeling like, oh, that didn't, that doesn't seem like a good investment of our time. Additionally, with enhancing that stakeholder engagement is having that very, very clear alignment between your program design and your mission. It allows you to also, share that with your stakeholders. Stakeholders is going to be like funders, partners, but definitely community members. And this is what sometimes people call like your elevator speech, right? If it's clear, and if you are, if it's something that makes sense to you as a staff person, as someone who's carrying out this program, or even like selling it or sharing it with someone, it's going to be clear to them. There's things that I've had in the past where I'm like, I know I need to do this, but it's very hard for me to explain why or how. And it's very clear that people find that my own confusion and that it comes across on them, right? They're like, I don't think I understand it. I'm like, I don't think I understand, but I need to say it. And there's been times where I'm like, I'm so sure about something because I understand it, because I've been bought in, because I was brought into sometimes even the early stages of it. That I'm like, yes, this is why we're doing it. And it's important for us. And here's how it's going to support the community. And so by having that connection of consistency, of impact, of how it connects to not just the organization, but how does it connect to you as, the mission, it allows that very clear alignment that then you're able to share out with, with those stakeholders. And again, it provides that, organizational cohesion where the programs contribute to this connection, to this fostering of a shared vision between staff, if you have volunteers between them, and they feel bought in, especially on those hard days where it's like, this program is not going the way we want it, or this activity is not going the way we want it, or we're like running into hiccups and challenges. It is going back to that mission that allows us to remember, like, I know why I'm in it. I know why I'm coming in. So those are some of the pieces that you want to think through when you're aligning that program design to the mission of the organization. So let's go ahead and pause. We're going to break for 5 minutes. And then if you can come back at 15 after your hour, we will be right back and we will continue. Perfect. Okay, so I hope, as Marcella said, that everyone was able to get up, move their body, get some water. Also, if you need to get up while we're talking, feel free. Like, do a little stretch, do what you need. So as luckily we have this step-by-step for program development. It doesn't mean that, this is the formula for it, but it gives you really the foundation to say, yeah, we really did all of these pieces. So either as you are starting a new program or as you even are reassessing some of the programs that you have, you can always go back into these, right? So we're going to start off with identifying a need. So, one way that you can really think through this is going through research to identify a specific need or issue. Now, I understand some of our programs are restricted by funding, so we might not be able to, get and contract a researcher, which also are very expensive, I have learned. But how can you gather data, statistics, and feedback from stakeholders? For a lot of you, you're already getting data and feedback because of your program that you're holding, right? So if you have, for example, case management notes, you have data on how many people you're serving, what the demographics are, what are some of the needs that they're saying are coming up for them, then that's great data. That's coming from the stakeholders themselves. And that allows you to understand the urgency, the need, what it is that they're saying, what's the gap, right? And that's demonstrating a need in itself. From there, you can really define your goals and objectives by clearly articulating what are the goals of the program, right? So let's say you're going to stand up a new board, a new advocacy board for a program. I think one of our the cohort members was talking about today. So how do we align this with a need? Maybe people were identifying that they would like some support, they would like some training around, how to share their story in a way that supports them, empowers them, allows them to select as much or as little as they'd like to share, but it still feels, true to what they want, and they feel that support from the organization. You can break down those goals into very measurable objectives in the way that the program aims to achieve, especially within the time frame. So I love the example from today around this board around, like, this first year is year 0. We're gonna put all these pieces into place and identify, what structure we need. Now, in the next year, we're gonna start recruiting. In the next year, maybe you're looking into trainings that allow, survivors to who are going to be partaking in this work to have, potentially, like, narrative training. Maybe people might benefit from support in learning how to do consulting work, how to invoice, how to think through some of the pieces of their own advocacy, especially if they want to, contract with or their organizations, or they might want to think through what parts of their story, that they might want to hold on to and what they want to share, and then the way that they want to share it. From there, you can start looking into your program components. So there's going to be a detailed plan with the key components of the program. So you're going to think about which activities you're going to be using, which interventions, what kind of strategy you might want to use. You're going to also think about what resources are required. So you're going to need to identify what type of personnel do I need. So not only what type of personnel, but the number of people, what type of positions they're holding, what type of background they may need or skills. Maybe you have people in place that you can build up to that. Like we were mentioning earlier, sometimes, our star case managers or advocates get promoted, but they still need that time to learn and to grow and to be nurtured and mentored into a position. Thinking about funding, that this program most programs cost us money, right? And how do we ensure that we have funding that, like it was mentioned earlier, that sometimes you get that seed funding to just stand it up, but then is there a plan to continue to keep it moving and going for further than just a year? Thinking about materials or partnerships that you might need and want. And then from there, we're going to think about how do we tailor this program into the needs of our audience. So think about the demographics. Who are you serving? What are their preferences, their cultural backgrounds? And that way you can design this activity in a way that resonates with them. So, giving my example about this group and program that we stood up for families, our demographic were immigrant families. All of them worked. We had to do this during the night, in the evenings of the weekday, right? Because that's when people were able to come. And knowing that the cultural backgrounds that we wanted to offer for that program specifically, we were offering it in Spanish. We had Spanish speaking facilitators. The food that we also asked about food, and we're able to make sure that we're meeting the needs, the preferences of people. And then thinking about that implementation plan, right? Creating an actual timeline for that implementation, identifying what milestones you want to hit, deadlines. And with that, also thinking about how you're going to monitor and evaluating if there are clear indicators and also metrics that allow you to see the progress and measure the effectiveness of the program, right? It's important to know, for example, if I'm setting up a program that allows somebody to get a skill set, before, pre, and post, right? Do they feel like they have an understanding about X skill, and then after they go through the program, also what their experience is with that program and if they see a benefit to it. And with the monitoring and evaluation, you can look and design collection methods that can be surveys. It can also be, the feedback that you're getting, from one-on-ones from the people that you're serving. So that way you make sure that you're addressing anything that might need to pivot, right? And I think that's also where it's really helpful to have that feedback, is when you get that input from stakeholders. So this is going to be from, how is it going with participants? How is the staff feeling? How are partners that you might be referring to or working with? How are the community members experiencing this new program? Use that feedback to refine and improve the components. I think one of the challenges that I've seen in my own work too is sometimes if I said like, oh, I don't think that's working, it felt like a failure of me, but also of the program. And that was really scary to do, instead of saying like, this piece is not working. So we're going to pivot and we're going to try this on. We're going to try this on, see if it works. And if it doesn't, we're going to try this. Right. And that allowed us to get into a space of learning from that feedback versus being scared of what the feedback said, because we didn't, it didn't say that it was perfect. And that's okay. Like this is what we do with programs that are new and existing, is we pilot it, we work through it to make sure, it fits, and that we do little pivots. So that aligns right with number 8 of doing a pilot test for the program. And you can conduct a small scale pilot test to see if there are any potential issues before you make this a much bigger scale implementations. So somebody had mentioned about having a housing navigator and starting with one, but this could potentially grow into more positions if it ends up being something that supports the community. It's also like feasible and sustainable for that person who's going to be holding that role, and also that it supports them in meeting the needs of having people housed and connected into these bigger systems that are very complicated at times. So as you gather that feedback from the pilot participants, you start making little adjustments, and that way you can enhance how effective your program is. And then from there, you can really look at the launching and implementation. So you officially launch the program and follow that timeline and that plan that you already set out. And you can start monitoring that progress, right? Address challenges in real time. Something may come up that you weren't expecting. So we talk about it, we discuss and see what the best path moving forward is. And again, this is all to ensure that the program delivery is successful. And this allows you, as step number 10, to really evaluate and reflect. So thinking about how you can identify and have an evaluation of the program's outcomes and impact, and is it effective against what you had originally said were your objectives. You can reflect on lessons learned, on your successes, on what you would like to improve, and use all of that knowledge so you can use future program development efforts, right? And be able to use that not in just the program that you're working on, but for future programs that you may establish. So this is a little bit of a framework that you can do a step-by-step. And again, these notes and also the recording will be shared with by Marcela. And so as you think through those and you want to come back to these, that'll be available for you. I'm going to go ahead and just, since these are questions that are more so reflective, I'm going to go ahead and move past these so we can get into some more of the program, the session, and some of the content that we want to share with you. So you'll have these, but just know that I'm going to skip these because these are questions that for you to consider for a new program, right? So we're going to talk, if it's okay, Marcela, are we okay, just given the time, are we okay moving forward from this group discussion, or is this a group discussion we want to have? I'm very open to it.
Yes, I actually messaged you and said, hey, we might want to skip this one.
Perfect.
And I will share. I'm just looking for the questions to share in the chat so we can move forward.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. And this is a break that we were going to have, but because we had such an active conversation, we're going to go ahead and move on to sustainability. I know that sustainability is at the forefront of a lot of our minds, especially if you hold any sort of, really at any position, right? As the executive director or as a director or manager, this is something that you're looking at budgets and you're making sure that you are able to have that sustainability and that ability to carry out that program, long-term program for participants, but also we need to pay our staff, right? So it's having that. And also as an executive director, you need to be aware of what this sustainability financially looks like for the organization. So let's talk about this. So sustainability, why is it important? Sustainability is the way that we're able to maintain or support something over the long term. So that allows our initiatives to be able to continue to operate, be able to continually make a positive impact well into the future without relying on short-term funding or external support. And that can be very difficult. A lot of our programs may have that seed money that, is time, bound for like a 1 to 3 years. And that can be challenging because even with 3 years, it sounds like a long time, but those 3 years go by really, really fast. Or the only way that we can get a program stood up might be with some funding that is going to be short term. But let's really look into how we can really look at sustainability and why it's a critical concern at times. So for today's conversations, why is the sustainability a concern for our organizations? Is there anything that comes up for you as you think about sustainability, and is there any concerns that it brings, or any challenges that you see that keep you up? Well, hopefully it's not keeping you up at night, but sometimes that can be a challenge as you think about how do we keep these programs sustainable.
I think that it's important for us to consider sustainability. Just on my own personal experience, and most of us know here, my agency is in a state of financial crisis, and it is because we grew so much so fast, and now we literally do not have the funds to to keep operating like we were. So I think that leadership could have done a better job at thinking of long-term sustainability for all our programs. Yeah, we were doing amazing things, and these programs were being developed and we were helping so many people, but I don't think there was enough consideration and planning for the future of these programs. And now we're scaling back on services. We're working reduced hours, everybody's stressed, and we're on survival mode. And I think in order to prevent any agency from going through something as traumatic as we are at Rainbow, I think we have to think, we have this program and we have all of these great ideas, but how are we going to sustain it in the long run?
Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so difficult because I think at times, and we've experienced this actually in the organization I'm in, you just see these resources and it's like, oh yeah, like we're going to go for that and we're going to go for that. And sometimes we've got all of them. And we're like, oh boy, now we just tripled the staff that we have. Also tripled is like we used to be 3 staff. So triple is like, whoa, for us. And that carries its own expenses. It carries expenses of onboarding, training. There's like overhead, right? And for overhead is going to be the money that's needed to keep on the lights, right? That you don't it's not direct assistance, it's not employee salaries, but it's like, oh wait, you need all these other things to like keep you up and running. A lot of times we forget that there are these growing pains, and that once that funding, if it wasn't long term and there wasn't a plan for long-term sustainability, once it goes away, you're laying people off, you're reducing the services that you had once opened up, and it's very hard to explain that to recipients and to staff. And there's a lot of trauma. Exactly, I think that's the right word that comes with it. There's a lot of harm and hurt, and even for the people that remain in the roles and in the organization, there's a lot of weight that they're carrying with stress, with taking on potentially some of the leftover work from the people that left, or if anything, just with the heaviness that came because they've witnessed and experienced and had to feel, that loss. So I think that, thank you for sharing that, because it is true that with sustainability, it is a concern, because if we don't think about it now, a year or 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to be experiencing some very difficult decision making. And there have been, for the organization I'm in, after we grew very significantly, there were, federal awards, and we realized that we had too much. When I say too much federal funding, we weren't diversified enough. We were almost solely connected to federal funding, and that had its own issues, right? It dictated the way that we could do our work, who we could serve, but also we're like, as soon as that funding goes away, we don't have a way to keep this up. We don't have a way to maintain staff. We don't have a way to maintain services. And I have been a part of an organization that closed down in its direct services and case management. And I remember it was like such a vivid like memory and lesson learned, because I remember it wasn't a decision that I was involved with. It was kind of just like leadership. They didn't even communicate it to us. till about a month out that we were going to be closing that area. And I remember we ended up having a closing, I don't know if they called it a party, maybe it was a celebration with the clients that were served, and the clients were crying. We didn't know how to explain it because we didn't make the decision. We kind of loosely knew why they were doing it. It was not connected to the mission. The organization was going a different route, which is fine, but it would have been helpful to know before. And I remember a survivor asking, like, we were so thankful for this, for this organization, for the help we find, but why are you guys closing? And nobody answered. And the people that were like, who made the decisions were in that room. And a lot of us were like, tell them, at least have transparency and tell them that, this is not the direction that you see for the organization. And it was just such like a heartbreaking moment because a lot of people, like, you could see the loss that they were experiencing because this was a significant support system and safety net that they have had. And the lack of connection, and this ties in both with sustainability, but with that connection to the organizational mission, it ended up, closing down a program that had been so important for that community, but it didn't fit for the organization, the way that the leadership saw it. It didn't fit for where they wanted to go long term. And it ended up closing a door where we tried to make as many warm referrals as we could. But as you all know, with any sort of working relationship that you have with a client, there's a lot of rapport. There's a lot of that went into it. And so it was just very sad. And I just remember saying, like, I never want to experience this again. That was the worst. It felt terrible. And for that reason, I'm like, I never want to go through it. So it is important to ensure that there is that sustainability. It's important, it's accountability. It's upholding our commitments to the survivors, to the communities that we're supporting through those services, right? It also has this financial resilience that it addresses for the potential impact if you have a funding disruption. Or I remember sometimes, because we relied so much on the federal funding, when there were the shutdowns, we're like, are we gonna be able to get paid, or like, what's happening? Because and it was so scary. And that's also, it was a little flag for us to be like, we really need to look into other funding streams, because we can't have this every time that there is a potential government shutdown. It's too likely, and it's just overwhelming for the staff and for clients as well. But also with this, when you're thinking about sustainability, some of the things that sometimes may not come straight to mind might be around succession planning. So how do we mitigate some of the risk when we have staff turnover, whether it's a layoff, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, or a key staff member departs? And how do we ensure that that continuity continues to support the survivors that you're working with? Thinking also about partner relationships, right? And recognizing that personnel changes or partnerships can change on potential dynamics. We had an experience more recent than I would like over I think it's been the last year, and it was exhausting and traumatic, but we had almost a full team kind of turnover, and the amount of work that went into trying to like piece things back together, see where things were left off, reconnecting with partners was really challenging for the staff that was remaining, and to like trying to pick those up. There were relationships with partners that were definitely harmed by the miscommunication and the lack of information that was shared when the departures happened. And I don't believe that any of it was intentional, but I definitely noticed how some of our partnerships ended up needing to like be nurtured again. Some of them are going to take a long time for us to get there. And so as organizations who are going to be part of transitions, it is important. And one of the things that my lesson learned was we need to have some just like project handbooks. It doesn't need to be a step-by-step of this is how you do your job. It's more so, here are how these processes work. Here are the partners that we have. And like, if something happens to me where, people should be able to access it, it shouldn't just be me that has all of this in my head. And unfortunately, we had been operating like that for a while, where, if one person was gone, we're like, uh-oh, where do they put that? Is this in a shared space? Was this on their desktop, right? Danielle, I was like, I'm saying that because I'm like, oh, it's been a lot trying to do that. Is that resonating with you, Danielle?
Yes, yeah, so much so. Like, just, we've been going through so many transitions and some big, just not even in our portfolio, like our department, but as I elevated to oversee like all and co-lead some of the national initiatives through all of our programming, the stuff that we just are finding things and can't find things and it's duplicative and it's just that it's taking way more time than actually doing the work. And so that is super stressful in terms of trying to lead and be innovative and support teams and support staff, and it's a nightmare, and the infrastructure is a mess, and also the history of some of the partnerships, like where we might have a good relationship with a partner, our other team members don't on a different project. So it's just like, it's really stressful.
It is. Yeah, no, I heard all of it. Transitions are super difficult it's not just for the person leaving, it's for the people that are left behind, and it is a struggle. And so as much as you can start looking at sustainability, not just financially, but also how do you sustain a project after somebody leaves, after if there are turnover on relationships, because sometimes the relationships are and partnerships are based on a one-to-one. Right? There's a lot of people that like, that was my person. I brought them in, but it also means I need to do my job in connecting them with other team members and help them foster those relationships, especially if it's a relationship that's going to support the overall programming, right? And then, we already talked about this, but finding diversity, it's so important to explore alternative types of funding beyond grants that can support your financial stability. Grants are often the more like tangible way to get a good chunk of money that can help you really stand up a program or keep it going, but they're so they're not always reliable. They're not always going to be there. There's times where if the funding ends, then that's it. That's the program ends. The people are laid off. We're not able to serve people. So you can look at how you utilize not just grants, but maybe look at donors, how you utilize individual donors, private foundations. One of the things that we stood up, and it took a couple years for us to get to this point, but it has like now started to turn a revenue. It's not huge, but it has a little bit of money in there. Is that we started a fee for service model. So basically, we have a training arm of our organization, and so people hire us to do tailored trainings for them, and they do contracts with us. And that first it was an investment because we're like, we need to build up these trainings. We know it up here, but we need to put it on paper. And we need to put ourselves out there, like need a training on XYZ, hire us, please. And people started to, and it's gotten to a point where we actually have probably more requests than we can accommodate in our current schedule. But that was one way of starting to diversify that funding. And there's still, ways that we need to explore, but that was one. So let's go a little bit into the difference between sustainability for programs and then the financial one. So with your financial sustainability, you're really looking to generate resources to meet the needs of the present without jeopardizing the future. So how do we make sure that we are able to pay the bills, make sure that people are paid, and also support the programs and the survivors that we're working with? And we have enough in the future. So for many of you who are looking at budgets, you should have a little bit of a reserve. And there's sometimes some guidelines of like you should have at least the ability to keep on going with your work for 6 months if funding were just to end. And you can add that on, and sometimes it's going to add on slowly. So if you are working with federal grants specifically, there's and many of you might be familiar with this, there's what's called an indirect cost. And so that is just what does it cost your organization to carry out a program? And that can go to general operating costs. There is what's called a de minimis, and it's a 10%. You automatically can opt in for 10% and over the overall budget. So let's say you're applying for an award of 250,000, 25,000 of that can go into the indirect, and you can just use that and have it going to your general operating, to your reserves. That's just money that's going to support you into keeping your program running. There's also a process that we've been going through where you negotiate and in direct costs, because it actually costs quite a bit to run some of these programs. And so, we went from like a 10% to I think like a 20%, which is a chunk of money. And sometimes it's hard as program people to be like, oh, but that's for direct services. Like, yes, and yes, you need direct services. And if there's no one to provide those direct services, they're not going to be there, right? So it's some ways that you can start thinking about your financial sustainability. And on your programmatic side, it's the ability to develop, to mature, and to cycle out the programs to be responsive to those that are going to evolve over time, right? Our programs evolve. Our sectors that we're working on in domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, they've evolved. The practices, what's promising and what's best practice has evolved. The people that are impacted, we're starting to see more, luckily, more support for those that have been underserved in the past. So that is really important to think through. And then Danielle, what I think what you had mentioned too is like the people carrying out those programs, right? Supporting the staff to make sure that there is that ongoing sustainability of staff. One thing that we just implemented, and I'm really excited about because I'm going to be doing it next year, is we implemented a paid sabbatical for people that have been in our organization for at least 7 years. And it's a 2-month paid sabbatical. And it took some advocacy from staff to make sure that like the board approved it. But we just implemented it this year. So our executive director is actually on sabbatical right now. So I'm covering for her, and then I'm going to be going on sabbatical next year, which I'm very excited about. And I'm like, okay, that's 7 years in. So I'm like, that's a lot. So how about we do some, you need the little things that are going to help us today. So a couple of things that we've started that have, I think, really supported staff morale, but just like wellness. We do summer Fridays. So for about 3 months in the summer, we only work half days. That has been lovely. And I think some people like this is probably the second organization that has done that. Love it. We also we have a summer closure. So we're closing next week. So everyone's closed, everyone's out, and that doesn't come off your time off or benefits. Everyone's just closed, right? And so that is a way for us to reset. It's also nice to be doing it with the full organization, because there's times where I'm out and I'm like, I know I'm gonna come back to a million emails. I know I'm gonna come back to a lot. It's like, at least everyone's gonna be out, so you're not gonna be sending me any. And we also do a year of event closure where we close between the holidays of Christmas and also New Year's. So those have been just in supporting our wellness have been significant. I'm trying to get us to a 4-day work week. I don't know if we're gonna get there. I'm trying, but I was like, if I can do one thing in this role, I want us to get to a 4-day work week. There's actually a lot of research that supports it. PS, if you're curious, I will send you that. But I'll just say that programmatic sustainability is also, how do we ensure the wellness of our people today, right? So that way they can continue to have that sustainable career and investment in their work. Also, because I'm part of a network organization, people have asked us like, hey, can you send me that policy? Because I would like to share with our staff or our board. I'm happy to share all of these things with any of y'all if y'all are interested. So let's, as we move on, let's talk a little bit about financial sustainability, right? This is where it's like, oh man, I wish we didn't have to worry about money, but we do. So I would love to hear from you all. How does the funding that you currently have, how does it shape your program? And also, what are some strategies that your program has implemented so you still have that integrity and that quality, even when there might be budget cuts? So I know, FOCA is getting some cuts. Sometimes the focus of some of the funding that we get, either state or federally, might change. So what are some of the funding sources that shape your program, and how does it shape your program depending on what type of funding you get?
I would like to share. And you said you work in DC. I don't know if you're familiar with my organization, Network for Victim Recovery of DC. Yeah. So I know that we just recently hired an attorney, but we gave a caveat due to budget cuts and the grants and everything happening with this year under the administration that we might not be able to fund them past September 30th into the new fiscal year. So just laying that information up front, I think, is really helpful. And then we do some of the same things that you mentioned in your organization. So like we have a week off in August, then we have the holiday week. And then we don't have a 4-day, but we have a 35-hour, because I think 4-day, like with loan forgiveness, what nonprofits, like you have to have like a certain amount of hours or something. So that we really try to make sure that all that is like written in the budget when it's given to the board of directors for approval.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear that your organization's doing that. And also, I think that transparency, right, when you're hiring, this is grant fund, and we do that on the job description, same, and we have that conversation, because even if it's 3 years out, we want to be very clear. One of the things that one of my colleagues over, you all might be familiar with the organization called Futures Without Violence, what he was sharing is, he's like, we're not even allowed to post a job description unless we have a plan and like have a clear secured funding for at least, I don't know if he said 5 or 6 years. He's like, even if we have grant money for it for 3 years, we need to be able to say how we're going to fund the next three. And I was like, oh wow. I was like, we would never be able to hire that. But I mean, that's great. That's great that they're already, thinking about it that long, because it is, I've taken definitely grant funded positions where I'm like, well, if it ends, I know I'm not going to be here. And in my head, I'm like, it's fine. I don't know that I'd be fine, to be honest, right? Like in my head, I'm like, yeah, like I justify it, like, yeah, I'll be fine. That's how nonprofits work, right? We say that all the time. That's just nonprofit work. But I did find that very interesting, because I'm like, I've never heard of that, where you don't hire until you have like a full plan on how you will like double that time. So I thought that was really interesting. Any other thoughts about how you've seen the funding sources shape your programs?
I think, it's similar to what Reese said and you did. We get a lot of DOJ funding, and then some state contracts, and fee for service. So that way, so our portfolio is funded that way, and so a lot of transparency on the front end around what that this position is grant funded. But then how it shapes our work is that we try, which is a kind of a curse, and it's kind of a curse and a good thing, but we try not to put somebody 100% on a position, so that we can diversify that person's sources. And so that maybe like I'm 25% here, 25% here, 50% here. And that way that can kind of build in that sustainability of funding. But then we're constantly applying every year to get funding, and then say, okay, which part of our team does this meet the skill set? Or we're looking at specific types of projects. So then how that shapes us is that we get narrow, we confine, even though we have a broader scope, we can't, and some of our team wants to work on different topics. The funding, because it's so restricted, only we kind of message it like we're staying in our lane, but really our lane is, we have multiple lanes, and it really prevents us to seek the other and more innovative funding, because we are now, like, all of us are working on these projects. So it's kind of a curse, but we haven't laid off anybody, and so it's just one of those things. Like, we've never lost a position due to lost funding, but we are really restricted now, and so that's the problem.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And that's also interesting, because I think the restriction sometimes can also restrict where we want to put some time into, and also what we can say. We realize that, or the type of program that it can be, or the type of services, even though this need might really be there, and we want to be able to meet it. If the funding says it's this, and so that can definitely be a challenge. And so as you all think about this work that you all are doing and how that funding shapes your program, also be very cognizant about the sources that you're working under and what you're getting. Sometimes that's the way to actually get something funded and be able to carry it out and serve it to the community. And also it comes with its caveats, right? There's times where it's, personally, our organization, we've definitely seen some issues and challenges with like DOJ and the way that they've done the Department of Justice and the way that they've done some things. So when we're doing our advocacy, we're giving some constructive feedback, but also I was like, oh, that's also our funder. And so I'm going to talk to them next week about, and they're going to be, monitoring my program. So it's, just be aware that it can also have that inhibition of your own values, and what you want to really advocate for. Okay, let's keep moving forward. And here, let's see. There we go. So on, when you look at financial sustainability, there's 4 pillars that you really want to think through. And these are going to be, one is having your strategic planning, right? This is your mechanisms to help clarify your organization's mission, the objectives, and it helps you prioritize your actions so you can be able to meet those mission and objectives. You also have your financial planning as part of this pillar, right? This is what's going to help us be able to be solid, be able to carry out our programming. So with this financial plan, this is a plan of action that's projected expenditures. What do you think you're gonna spend? What's the organization's potential to generate that income to cover the expenses? Is this different? It's not too much different than a budget, but it's really a dynamic document that changes frequently as the program needs evolve and new information might come in. So the primary purpose is really to determine if the organization is going to be able to have sufficient resources available. And that's what you ask, right? Do I have the resources to achieve our goals? Is this something that we need to work towards before we launch and invest in it? You also need another pillar, which is the sound administration, is knowing how to manage your resources. It's important to be able to sustain, that financial and achieve that financial stability. So you're going to have, institutional policies that help the organization utilize and make the most of the resources, but also make sure that there's transparency in that fiscal management, making sure that your team knows how those funding sources are being used, what funding is available for what program, and who's implementing those programs, that they're aware of it. And sometimes that's the piece that's lacking. There's sometimes organizations that you wear all the hats, so you do know and understand or have to around the budgets. And there's times where it's so you have a finance department if you're to that point, and there's such a disconnect where this arm is not talking to the other one. So that's where you want to bridge that gap. And then finally, looking at that income diversification and generation. So how can we increase our income streams and reduce that dependence on government funding, which we're all acknowledging, like, it sounds like a great idea. We all want to do it. We're still figuring out how to do it. And there are some ways, such as, looking for different donor bases or even that like fee for service model. But knowing that although government funding is great and sometimes it feels a little bit more accessible than these other pieces, by diversifying our funding, we're able to have more flexibility and more opportunity to continue to do our work even after those streams end. So I'm going to, because this is just a bit of a definition, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward, because I want us to really think about what it actually costs to run a project or a program. You have, to remember that there is not just the direct cost, direct cost being what's going to cost to pay your employees, what's going to cost to provide any sort of service, services to the survivors. So if you're doing materials, if you're doing a curricula, if you're providing housing, so you need therefore, housing, I was going to say equipment, but that's not the right word, client support. So knowing what all of these true costs end up being, because that's going to be really important to sustainability planning. Sometimes, we think about, for example, you're thinking about, a salary is 40,000, but we're not, we're forgetting that there's also fringe benefits, which include like healthcare insurance. It's going to include, potentially a retirement plan. And those are where you really want to take time to really think through how you ensure that you're encompassing all of the costs that are associated with that, right? And you all will likely have examples in your own work in a program where, it might sound like, hey, that's not that big of a cost if we stand up, let's say, a support group. There might be materials that go into that. There's probably going to be staff time for planning and for the execution of the program. There's going to be time that you're going to need a facility, or even if it's just the building that you're already in. And that's where you can start ensuring that you account all of the expenses. So that way you're really able to plan out what the true cost of that will be. So this is the map that I was talking a little bit about earlier, and it's a matrix map. I know Marcela is going to share the link for it, so that way you get a little bit more feedback. But one of the things that's really interesting, and as I was reading this article from the that has a matrix map, it talks about how you can, in a matrix, assess the profitability and the impact of the program. Because there's going to be things that are, the programs that you're going to be really excited about, and they really support the impact of the mission and the organization, but they're not profitable, or they're barely covering expenses, or you might be pulling from another funding stream, but the impact is high. So let's continue to support it. Let's continue to work on it. There's going to be some that are going to be really high impact and have all the expenses covered, or even turn a profit. Great, let's keep doing that. There's going to be some that, are very low mission, like it's not super connected. You might have a golf tournament, and that doesn't do a lot for the mission, but it gives us money. We're going to continue to do that, right? Because we need that money to be able to sustain those hearts, which is like, we love this, but we don't have the money for it, but we're going to pull money from this tournament, or, other areas that you really want to invest in. And then you have these stops where it's more so, there are activities that not only lose money, but they're low impact, right? And those are either like poorly attended workshops, maybe, and those have happened where I've been like, oh, people really are going to love this workshop. And then nobody came, or one person came, right? It didn't have the impact that we were thinking about. There might be fundraising events or other type of pet projects that just are not panning out to really supporting either the mission, it doesn't support the impact, and it's not profitable. So as you go into that link, and read that, if it's supportive to you, especially in times of transition and where you see an impact that you want to make sure that leadership also is seeing, or that you're getting buy-in from your team, that's a great way where you can start to map some of that out. Right. And then with programs, you want to, okay, no, we're good, right? I thought I went backwards, but I was like, oh, no, I think we're okay. With just to do some slight wrap up, when you're thinking about program sustainability, you're still going to have these pillars that hold it up, right? So you have your succession planning, your financial planning, sound administration. The way that you're going to do some of these things is really thinking about, with the program sustainability, how you're doing some of the operating procedures, right? We talked about this when there was staff turnover, and then we had to pick up the pieces, and some of them we still don't know where they're at. That could have been a really great way to make sure that we had standard operating procedures about how certain pieces of the program work. Thinking about post-grant planning, what's the plan to continue this program even after the award ends? And thinking also with the sound administration about resource management and making sure that there's still that effective management of the resources, so we can continue to achieve that financial stability, but also that the staff is informed about what is available. Because sometimes there's that disconnect about the people carrying out the program who may not have that connection point. Okay, we are at time. So I do have a little bit of time left, but Marcela, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. How would you like us to continue or pause?
Yeah, so if you can stay 5 minutes, and I'm speaking to Karen and everyone else, if you have questions, you can stay behind. If you need to head out to another meeting or take a break and get some lunch, that's totally fine. But I can stay a little bit later too to keep recording.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about this organizational readiness. And again, we'll cover this in 5 minutes. You'll have the slides and the recording. So when you're thinking about, if your organization, is thinking about a new program, or if it's refreshing something, it needs to be ready to demonstrate its commitment to the program in order for that program to survive and honestly to thrive. This means getting that leadership and that board to be, strong supporters of the program goals. And this is where you get the buy-in, right? You might have transitions or new leadership or even existing leadership where they might not be getting that connection point. And the way that we can do that is having that buy-in from all levels of the organization, but that's going to be that alignment with the mission, vision, values, those principles that connect to whatever program or project that we're trying to put out. That also includes the programmatic support across departments. So if you have various departments, which most organizations do, you want to make sure you have that communication support throughout the organization that the program is going to be connecting to. So you can think about how you can collaborate across those departments in order to sustain, better those programs. And if there are any barriers that you've encountered, how can you address them? You also want to have that fiscally sound plan. So that way you have a consistent stream of unrestricted funds when possible. Unrestricted funds are hard to come by. So when, as you start thinking through how you can make space for that and how you can use, even what you're getting from that indirect cost or for a fee for service model, and use that to kind of bolster up that safety net. And then finally thinking about how strategic integration looks like for long-term planning. So that's considering how the program supports the overall strategy for the mission, the planning for future organization's roadmap, right? So like I mentioned in my example before, we were doing a direct services program where the organization did not see itself going, right? And it's identifying that roadmap and being able to address and make pivots early on and as kindly as possible and as thoughtfully as possible. So that way, those that are being served are able to feel that commitment to them. And with as you're working with these communities, you also want to determine the community's readiness by assessing who your networks are, what the strengths for the connections and the networks that you have local. If you're a local program, I know somebody's mentioned they have some statewide initiatives or some citywide initiatives. If you're doing work at the national level, you can start to look at what resources and support or visibility for your program will be there. With collaborations, you can really identify which partnering organizations can help sustain your program, especially after that grant period ends. And if you don't have the resources to be the sole provider, this is really where collaborations are critical. Obviously, with relationship building, you need those strong relationships within your community. You need buy-in from your community. And that really comes in with consistent relationship building. You have to have the rapport and make sure that the needs of your program understanding that the needs that your program is fulfilling really allow the community members to see that they see the value, that they see the impact of your work. And then finally, with that common vision part and the relevant pieces, is ensuring that there's a common vision with the relevant community. So that's where you connect with community members in this planning process and ensure that the goals of your program also aligns with what the needs and aspirations are for the community as well. And I'm gonna just put some reminders that we still need to do evaluation and communication. So it's important for us, even after we've launched a very successful program, to evaluate and make sure that we're meeting our objectives and that it continues to support the community that we intended to support. And then finally we're gonna, I think, hold on, we're just making sure I didn't, there it is, just strategic planning. So this is the last slide for me. But just thinking about these different pieces for succession planning, for community readiness, evaluation and communication and financial planning, there's some questions for you to take back with you. And you can even take these to your team and really dissect, are these questions that we've thought out? And if not, some of these, one or two might be good starting points for your organization, especially as you think about new programs or programs that you may want to put some additional attention to. So that being said, thank you so much for those that were able to stay on and for everyone that came, and I'm going to turn it back to Marcela.
Thank you so much, Gaden, for having such a lively conversation and allowing so much space for folks to talk, and then also your knowledge on the subject. So thank you all for staying a little bit later and joining the conversation. I dropped some links in the chat, so please provide some feedback on the webinar, and please register for next month's webinar, which I can't believe it's already July next month. It's coming up. And then a reminder to please fill out your LEAP coaching mid-cohort feedback. So lots of things to sign up for and fill out. Appreciate you all. I hope you have a lovely weekend, rest of your week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.